safe to say that we are now currently going through a pivotal moment in the fantasy genre. And before you ask, no, I do not mean we are getting less cookie-cutter isekai, cause they're not going away anytime soon. What I mean is that currently the anime community is sort of going through this phenomenon that the concept of high fantasy anime is now being fully realized as a wide marginal preference to see when we decide what to watch. Such as last year, when Freerun has been undeniably soaring for the prefaces of this state, as for the fact that it is still currently the highest rated show on my anime list, meaning that the way you see anime nowadays is about to change, and from the looks of it, that phenomenon is already beginning to. So why don't I lay down on what could be the next big thing after Freerun? Luckily for me, I don't have to look very hard, because throughout the past few months, yes, I know it's been this long, I've been catching up with the one show whose antics not only captures the feeling of wanting to go on a high-stakes thrilling adventure, but also a series where not everything appears to be so simple at a first glance. So ladies and gentlemen, may I present you to the one and only Delicious in Dungeon.
Cheese.
So what exactly is Delicious in Dungeon anyway? Well, unless you've played any dungeon crawler game, whether if it's tabletop or literally just any sort of RPG, then you'll be pretty familiar with what the baseline is set for the main story. Simply put, it follows a party of adventurers who, by which the instant we see them for the first time, they're kinda... yeah, no, they're f***ed. But that's okay, because whenever you die inside the dungeon, you could just be resurrected and get to live another day. Which would be the case for our main party, except they got mysteriously teleported outside the dungeon that not only leads to losing all their inventory, but also this guy's sister to be devoured by the red dragon they were facing. With barely any supplies and a couple of members having already left the party, our heroes are left with a bit of a dilemma in their hands. Save up supplies and prep up longer, or risk going into the dungeon straight away before this guy's sister gets fully digested. Which, obviously, neither of those sound ideal. But, fortunately for Laios, he has an alternative idea. Which, instead of buying simple prep food for the journey, why don't we use the dungeon's monsters as the food? Hence Delicious in Dungeon! Wow! Understandably, none of the other members are too ecstatic about this. I mean, how would you even cook, let alone eat a monster to begin with? Which to that question has already been salvaged thanks to our new final member to round out the party. This is Senshi, a dwarf whose experience with the dungeon not only goes up to par with the other characters, but in which his own set of skills mainly excels in cooking, and not just that, monster cooking. And would you know it, it actually works out really well in the party's favor. So with that synopsis out of the way, let's talk about what makes this anime stand out amongst its peers. Well, for one, the main selling point that I bet would be the biggest standout would obviously be its world building. Like, this entire show, in and of itself, has a rather well-detailed ecosystem that shifts in various scenarios that not only would our heroes be able to encounter, but even with the how and what types of monsters can be eaten through many different cooking methods. Meaning that as soon as you dive into what it has to offer, it pretty much subverts yet unsubverts your expectations when what was initially set to be a straightforward journey into more of a case where the writer's just being all like, now what sort of unbenevolent creature do I feel like eating today? While these certain aspects may not necessarily translate that well to cooking in real life, since we're talking about, you know, eating monsters, but when you witness it, you start to realize just how well utilized that concept does when you watch the anime do its own thing. Since not only does the dungeon have a huge mass of all different kinds of beasts and the like, but it even delves into their biology, what sort of routines they usually take, and most important of all, how well do they taste? And by the time you progress further into the story at hand, that sort of presentation pays off really well when you start to put the cooking factor into the equation. And speaking of which...
It's ready. Oh, yeah, this is the shit!
Concept-wise, this is definitely up there as one of the more unique takes to withstand in the fantasy genre, but who is to say you can't have a good time watching this without an engaging cast? Now, I may have briefly talked about Laios for a good minute, but can I just say that this guy right here, Yeah, he is definitely one on the spectrum. Not only is he so obsessed with eating monsters, where to the point he has a vigorous mindset in which he notes a multitude of details in the monster encyclopedia than your average person would, but as it turns out that thanks to his said mindset, 90% of the time he is able to get his party out of the most direst of circumstances through some of the most unconventional methods that he can put up with. Senshi, on the other hand, is a lot more sensible. While he is very well acknowledged on how certain monsters would react and taste just on a similar amount of lyuses, he is overall a pretty chill guy once you get to know him better. Chillchuck is the party's locksmith, which, while his small stature leaves him underpowered compared to his companions, he makes up for that via carrying a certain array of equipment that helps to bypass any potential trap or obstacle that could hinder the party's progression. Definitely a guy you will count on when you're going through a dungeon that shifts rooms around 24/7. Oh yeah, did I not mention that the dungeon they're going in has some random shifting elements to it? Yeah, they're really not beating the roguelike allegations anytime soon. And finally, you have Marcel. Which I guess you could say she has a hard time being elfless. Okay, but for real though, Marcel is the spellcaster of the group, and while for a time we enjoy spending our time watching her being a complete girl failure, she does remain as the beating heart of the group, as she's one of the more compassionate people you'll ever come across when scouring the dungeon. And also, she does retain responsibility for some of the more important moments in the show down the line. Now with all these people in tow, it really goes to show just how both their chemistry and character dynamics fit so well with each other. As you're watching the group go through each trials and tribulations they come across in the dungeon, it feels like you're watching an immersive D&D experience where you have them constantly bicker on what went wrong, or what sort of decision they might take that could drastically affect the party long term. And that to me is just the best feeling ever when watching this, because we definitely need a whole lot of other anime whose character dynamics can certainly uphill those from Delicious in Dungeon. Plus, even design-wise, the original creator of the series really took a lot of thought and detail going to each and every one of what type of character's appearance should look like, the clothes they wear, and what different types of races do they belong to. I have linked a whole video about this in which it goes further into more detail if you're curious, but simply put, these characters, hell, even the extra ones, help to coerce the show's identity into a more compact form, which is something that I feel is desperately missing from a whole lot of other fantasy anime, where 90% of the time, you can just tell that they're not even trying at this point. However, this wouldn't be your typical fantasy-style anime unless you integrate certain elements in the narrative that will make you rethink everything that came beforehand. Like, what, you thought it was going to be a simple adventure where the darkest thing that really happens at a party is eating a bunch of ghouls? You thought, bitch. Remember what I said at the beginning, that the whole reason the party decided to go back in was so they could save Lysa's sister from being fully devoured by a dragon? Well, what happens when they manage to reach across said dragon? Oh yeah, we're definitely going back there.
You one ugly motherfucker.
Now about a year ago, I have made a whole video primarily talking about Made in Abyss, in which, contrast to while at first glance, is just being a lighthearted show about exploring an unknown land filled with limitless possibilities as to what sort of creatures and distinguished landscapes lie in their wake. Unfortunately for our lead characters, there underneath lies a very disturbing origin behind some of its features, and one that had led to what serves as some of the most pivotally dark moments in the story. That applies to Dungeon Meshi as well. But when you compare that to the former, it really doesn't play that way in a similar manner. While there are definitely some messed up elements to witness in this anime, it's not as in-your-face as Made in Abyss would otherwise like to reveal at times. In fact, while some of the dark reveals in this anime do serve a narrative purpose, both with its cards and the world for sure that is, it doesn't drastically change the way that we think of what the anime is like overall. Hell, by the time we start the journey, we barely know any of these characters to begin with. So instead, the show expands on those aspects, in which not only do we learn each of these characters' motives and end goals down the line, but to even learn more about the mystery behind the dungeon itself, as how it will later affect other people down the line. To me, that is a really creative way to engage in the fantasy aspect with us watching, because this means we, as the viewer, are sort of stuck in the same situation as the main characters are. For example, why did the dungeon suddenly pop out of nowhere in a rural island? Why is it that people can only get revived in said dungeon but not on the surface? And most important of all, why do these monsters have to taste so damn good? I'm sorry. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself there. Now, some of these questions will get answered later down the line, but truth be told, that's kind of what adds to the charm of this series, albeit in ways that you might not expect.
What? What the fuck?
What I mean is that there's a lot of fantasy out there nowadays, and that's not even counting the high concept of fantasy that are mainly present in other forms of media. Yet, in some way, shape or form, I have never seemed to grow tired of it. Cause to me, what Delicious in Dungeon wants to say about all of this is that despite the adventuring, despite the discovering of what else lies beneath the journey, and despite all of the different races and the monsters and the hardships that comes with thriving in a fantasy world, at the end of the day, all you really want is a hefty meal with a bunch of friends or family that you cherish the most. And that is objectively the most cathartic thing that anyone could ask for.
What did you do that for?
I hate mushrooms.
Okay, now you're just being selfish.